As we approach a new year and you think about your New Year's resolutions, perhaps it's time to learn date functions in SQL. Hi, I'm Brian Amrine with Value Driven Analytics, publishing analytics training videos, including SQL training videos, at least once a week, so please subscribe. But today we're going to be focusing on all kinds of date functions within SQL Server. Today we're going to be covering how you can extract different parts from a date field, how you can take the difference in days or months between two date fields, and even how you can add a certain number of days or months to a particular date field. All kinds of different date manipulations and more. Now, while most parts of a SQL query are the same across all the different versions of SQL out there, date functions are one of those functions that can vary quite a bit from version of SQL to versions of SQL. The things we're going to cover today work really well in SQL Server Management Studio. They generally work well in Snowflake SQL, Teradata, probably a lot of other SQL platforms as well, but they're going to be quite different if you're using a different version of SQL like SQLite, for instance. So keep that in mind. But if you're using SQL Server Management Studio or one of those other versions of SQL that I mentioned, you're in the right place. Well, here we are in SQL Server Management Studio. Now, you don't need to follow along today. Today's concepts are really simple. What I would recommend is perhaps identifying a table that you have access to that has some date fields in it and applying the concepts that I go over today there. But you're certainly welcome to follow along with this code as well if you'd like. Today I'm using a database called Value Driven Analytics. I've already created that. And within that database, I've created a schema, which is a folder of tables called date illustration. And now within that schema, I'm going to create one table. We're just going to be looking at one table today that will manually populate, and it's called marketing interactions. It's basically a table of one row per marketing interaction, and with a customer name, a marketing channel, and the interaction date. And it also is going to have that customer's last sale date as well. So I'll go ahead and create this. Now, notice this, I'm creating intentionally here for illustration purposes. The interaction date is actually not in date format. Probably should be, but I'm putting it in the invarchar format. Just want to show you what happens when that's the case and how we can handle that with the casting function. Then we do have the last sale date, and that is set up as a date, as you'd expect. So the next thing I'm going to do is insert some rows into this data set. I'll use this for that. We just have very simple use case, 4 rows here. First thing we're going to do after inserting those rows, just take a quick look at our table with a select star from this. So we haven't done anything date related yet, just showing you the context for what we're looking at today. All right, we've got our customer field, marketing channel, interaction date, and a last sales date. Now the interaction date looks like a date, but again, it's actually an invarchar format, so keep that in mind. The first thing I want to show you today is how you can extract different parts of the date. And you could actually do this for hours and seconds as well if you had a timestamp field. Today we have simply year, month, and dates, just true date fields, not really a timestamp. But I'm going to extract the year, and I'm going to show you how we do this against the actual date field, last sale date here first. So year is a function. You just type the word year, open parentheses, just like most functions start with the open parentheses and stop with the close parentheses. And the only argument you need to feed it is the field that you want to extract the year from. So in this case, we'll do last sale date. We might call this last sale year. I'm going to continue to select all the fields so you can have a comparison of the original field versus this new field. It just extracts the year from that particular field. It's really simple. So one reason you might want to do this is perhaps you pull that year and maybe you group by that year if you wanted to see year, maybe marketing interactions over time. In this case, we've just got 2023 here, but we've now pulled out the year so you can aggregate by that, which is pretty neat. Another thing you can do is pull out the month in particular. So let's pull the month of this same field. call that last sale month. You can do the same thing with day, you just use day here. I will. There we go. So it's the number month. So 8, 10, 11. Great. And let's just go ahead and also pull the day. We'll call that last sale day. There we go. All right, so we've got it parsed out by year, month, and day. Now, what if we wanted to put these back together in a date? We can do that too. Now, of course, here we have the original date. So this task would be useless in this situation, but I'm going to show you how we can adapt it and maybe make some unique use of it. There's another function, date function as well, that we can use, and it basically builds a date together. So the function is called datefromparts, and it takes 3 arguments: a year, a month, and a day. So technically, we can take the year of the date itself, comma, so in a function, your arguments are separated by commas. The second argument's a month, and the last argument is a day, and we can basically rebuild that date. Call this as last sale date rebuilt. It's just going to be the same as the last sale date, of course. And there you go. Now, here's where this function could be potentially useful. What if you wanted to pull the first day of the month of the last sale date? So in this case, August 1st wouldn't change. It is the 1st. But for 10/14, 10/19, you'd want it to be 10/1 of 2023. For 11/20, you'd want it to be 11/1 of 2023. Doing that can give you a field that you can kind of easily sort by to order by month. Well, remember this date from parts. It takes 3 arguments. The year, we fed it that. The month, we fed it that. And the day, which in this case is the exact day. But if we wanted it to always be the 1st of the month, we just replace this with 1. Watch what happens when we do that. And now we'll call this last sale month, perhaps. Be a better name for it. Aha, the 1st of each month. So if you wanted to group by month, this would be a great way to do that. So date, last sale date. Now I want to show you how you can really make use of this to dynamically pull the latest X number of months, most recent months. We can actually reference in SQL today's date, even right now when your query is being run, down to the minute and second and beyond. So believe it or not, you can actually write a SQL statement that doesn't have a from statement. In this case, we can just do select getDate. This is how you pull the current time. Whatever time this is ran at, that's what's going to be returned. So right now, 12/23/2023, you've got the hour, the minute, it's all there, which is really neat. And if I run this again, that time is going to change. Really cool, right? So it always reflects the current time it's being ran. Now we're going to use this getDate function a little bit later. Before we get to that, I want to show you another date function. There's actually a way to add a certain number of days or months and many other time period cadences to a date. So in this case, we're going to keep using last sale date. I'm going to use the dateadd function. And first, I'll maybe add days. So the keyword there is day. That's the first argument, is what cadence do you want to add? Day, month, year, etc. So we're going to add a day. And then the next thing is how many of that time period do you want to add? In this case, I'll add maybe 5 days. And the last argument is what field does this apply to? So we'll use last sale date for now. And we'll call this 5 days later. I'll go ahead and run that. Notice 5 days later field is 5 days after the last sale date. Pretty neat. Now, if we wanted to go 5 days before, we can actually just put a negative there, which is really neat. Now we should get a date that's 5 days before. So this can be positive or negative. What if we wanted to go 5 months before? Well, instead of using day here, we can use something like month, and there's all kinds of other cadences that you can subtract: hours, years, and so forth. All right, now we're basically going back 5 months from each of these last sale dates. Really neat. Now let's try doing this for our date field that was not actually cast as a date. It says an in varchar, the interaction date instead here. Now again, in varchar rather than the last sale date we've been using was actually a date field, which is what you want when you're using date functions like this. But let's just see what happens when we use one that's not cast, that's not currently set up as a date. So it actually worked. It seems to be returning 5 months prior. Now this is relative to the interaction date, but you can see that's lining up. So what it seems to have been able to do, because probably because the format is in all of the values, it's very clear, year dash month dash day, is it seems to have converted it, but it seems to have converted it into a timestamp here. And so you've got all the hours, the minutes, and it's just assuming zeros there. So it's not very clean. What if we wanted this to be set up as a date? Well, and this applies to dates, all kinds of variable types. In SQL, you can use the cast function. And as you probably know with SQL, you can nest things. In fact, we've already been nesting. We nested the year function within the datefromparts function and the month function as well. But here we're going to, before we do our date add, we could also do it afterwards as well, is we're going to cast this. It was as an in varchar, but what we're going to do is change the data type. That's what the cast function is used for. And we're going to cast it as a date. Now, if some of our dates were not set up as dates, maybe they had letters in them instead, this would probably fail. There is something called try cast as well that perhaps would, if it can't convert it to a date, would actually make it null. So that's an option you can use if you're comfortable with that. If there is an error, just making it null, that can sometimes work. In this case, all of ours are set up as dates. They look like dates. We just need to cast it as a date, and that'll not try to put it as a timestamp. We're telling it exactly we want this to be a date. So casting as a date can be very helpful there. And there we go. It got rid of the timestamp. We've just gotten the date part of it. So that's another use case for this. If you had a variable set up as a timestamp and you needed just the date part, casting it as a date, as we did here, cast open parentheses, list the variable, and then as, and again, this works for other types too, whatever data type you want it to be, and then close parentheses. Casting it is great. And if there are exceptions and you want it to kind of just make it null if it doesn't fall within the parameters of that field, use a try cast could potentially handle that for you. Okay, so that is your date add function. Well, what if we wanted to subtract two dates? How could we do that? Maybe we wanted to get the difference in number of days between our interaction date and our last sales date. Well, that's a great use case for the datediff function. It looks like this, just datediff, open parentheses. The first thing that you feed into the first argument is the time period cadence, similar to dateadd. So in this case, we'll do the number of differences in days. Now the starting point, the starting date is what would come first. So let's say in this case, we want it to be the interaction date, and we'll cast that as a date since, again, it was originally set up as an in varchar, so we'll take care of that, get it in date format, and then the second argument will be last sale date. There we go, and that'll be our difference variable. We'll call it difference. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Okay, so we get negative 31. What is that telling us? That's telling us that the last sale date came 30, that was our second argument, came negative 31 days before September 1st. Yeah, that's right. And so if we switch the order here, you can imagine it'll be the opposite. So in this case, our last sale date was first for this first row. And so it's showing a negative amount. Again, it's starting with the second argument and then showing how many days it took to get to the field in the third argument here, the date in the third argument. So if we just switch these, we should get a positive number for that first row at least. Yes, 31. So now it starts with last sale date. It says August 1st. How many days is it until the interaction date, September 1st? And that's 31 days. Now down here it's negative because the last sale date was actually after the interaction date. Now one thing I want to emphasize is with the date functions, these can be put in the select statement as we've been doing so far, but you can also write these directly into the where statement, the group by statement, the order by statement, even the on statement. When you're joining tables together, you can directly be calculating things with these date functions in your on statement while you're joining tables. One thing we'll do next is actually show how these can be used in the where statement. So let's say we've got one record here for last sale date that was in November, and it's December right now. Let's say we want to get all the rows from last month. Maybe it's a report that we schedule to run on the first of each month that should only contain rows where the last sale date was in the previous month, and we want that to be dynamic. So by default, we might go in and say where the last sale date, if we were doing this manually, where last sale date, since we're in December, would be between 2023 11/01 and 2023 11/30. Okay, so we would run this and we would just get that row. And then when it comes to January, we would update this to be the latest month. And so then this would become 12/31. Well, how could we do that potentially dynamically? That's a great a use case for using the getDate function. So what we can do with the getDate function is perhaps generalize this last sale date by getting just the month, the first day of that month. So we'll use datefromparts, and we'll extract the year of the last sale date and the month of last sale date. There's a lot of ways to accomplish this use case using a combination of dateadd, datediff, datefromparts, so forth. We'll try to make this as simple as we can there, but there might be a simpler way. So if we just take the first month part, then we can just set this to say this needs to equal, the first date of that month needs to equal, at least currently, 11/01. We'll start with that, just the manual use case for it here. Looks like I need to add a close parentheses here. So we're using date from parts to get the first date of that particular last sale date. It'll be the first of that month. Great. Okay, so we still get that row, but now how do we make this dynamic? Well, we can use datefromparts to get just the first day of the month of the current month. So instead of using last sale date here, we'll get the current year and we'll get the current month. So I'm writing this just to show what using datefromparts to get the first of the month, the current month is. We've gotten that right here. Okay, so now how could we take this and get last month's first? Because that's what we're filtering on here. Well, now let's add on to that dateadd month, and then let's go back 1 month. We're doing month, or just the same thing we did here. Month, we're gonna go back 1 month in this case. And you could just set this up for your use case. And then that's relative to the first of the current month. So now this should return currently November 1st. Now next month when we get to January, this is going to get updated to be December 1st. So it'll dynamically update to always be the first of the most recently completed month. We're just going to copy this value based on this function and replace it with this hard-coded value. Now watch what happens when we run our main query here. We get the row, and what's cool about this is next month in January, it's going to pull December values automatically. Any row that has a last sale date in December will be populated. And there's so many other ways of, we could have probably used dateadd on the last sale date instead of getdate. There's so many ways of doing this, but this is just one method for dynamically writing a SQL query to pull in the latest month, or it could even be the last 12 months if you wanted to do like a between statement. It's very similar to what we did here. All that's possible with date functions. Well, that's it for today's video on date functions. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please consider liking the video. If you'd like to see more videos like this on different SQL functions and different analytics topics in general, please consider subscribing to Value Driven Analytics. Leave a comment if you have any questions, and I'll do my best to get to your response as soon as possible. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.